The shuttle was dead. Commander Jake knew this because the lights had stopped flickering 2 hours ago, and the emergency oxygen was down to its last 6%. He floated in the wreckage, surrounded by twisted metal and the frozen bodies of his crew. The ambush near the transit point had come without warning. One moment they were escorting a diplomatic convoy through neutral space. The next moment, warships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel and opened fire on everything that moved. Jake had managed to get 3 of his people into the escape pod before a plasma round tore through the shuttle's midsection. The pod had launched. He hoped it had made it to safety. He would never know for certain. Now he drifted alone in the cold darkness of space, watching the oxygen counter slowly tick down toward 0. His suit had taken damage during the initial attack. The heating system was failing. His fingers were growing numb, and his breath came out in small white clouds that fogged up his visor. He thought about his sister back on Earth. He thought about the small apartment in Chicago where he had grown up. He thought about the way the lake looked in summer when the sun was setting and the water turned gold and orange. He wondered if anyone would tell her what happened to him. The proximity alarm broke through his thoughts. Something large was approaching. Jake turned his head slowly, conserving energy and oxygen. Through the debris field he saw it. A warship, long and angular, its hull covered in the distinctive scale-like plating that made their vessels look like massive predators swimming through the void. It was one of the ships that had attacked the convoy. He recognized the markings on its side. For a moment he considered trying to hide among the wreckage, but there was no point. His suit was broadcasting a weak emergency signal that he could not turn off. They had already found him. A smaller craft detached from the warship and moved toward him, a boarding shuttle. Jake watched it approach with a strange sense of calm. He had faced death before. He had accepted it when the shuttle went down. Whatever came next, he would face it the same way he had faced everything else in his life, one breath at a time. The boarding shuttle swallowed him whole. He felt the artificial gravity take hold as he was pulled inside through an energy field that sealed the airlock behind him. The air was thin and carried a strange metallic smell that made his nose burn. Atmosphere. They breathed a different mixture than humans. Before he could adjust, they were on him. 7 soldiers surrounded him, each one standing over 7 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in hard scales that shifted color with their emotions. Right now, those scales were deep red and orange. Aggression colors. They held plasma rifles aimed at his chest, and their 4 eyes watched him with cold intelligence. Jake raised his hand slowly. He did not speak. He did not move except to show that he was not a threat. They stripped him of everything. His damaged suit came off first, then his emergency tools, his beacon, his water pack, even the small knife he kept hidden in his boot. They were thorough and efficient. Within minutes he stood before them in nothing but his thin emergency, barefoot on cold metal, completely exposed. One of the soldiers grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. Jake did not resist. He let them lead him through narrow corridors filled with harsh blue light and the hum of alien machinery. Others watched from doorways as he passed. Some of them had never seen a human before. He could tell by the way their secondary eyes widened with curiosity. They brought him to a large chamber near the center of the ship. The walls were lined with screens displaying tactical information in the flowing script of the language. Armed guards stood at every entrance, and at the far end of the room, seated on a raised platform, was the one who commanded them all. She was taller than the others. Her scales were a striking silver-blue color that caught the light like polished metal. 4 eyes studied him as he was brought forward and forced to his knees. She wore a military uniform that marked her as high-ranking, and around her neck hung a medallion that Jake recognized from intelligence briefings. A ship commander, one of their elite. She rose from her seat and walked down to stand before him. Up close, she was even more imposing. Her movements were fluid and controlled, like a predator circling prey. When she spoke, Her voice was deep and carried the slight hiss that all had when speaking Galactic common. "You are the only survivor," she said. "Your fleet is destroyed, your convoy is scattered, your people will not come for you." Jake looked up at her. His body was cold and tired. His lungs burned from breathing the thin atmosphere, but his eyes were steady. "I have been in worse situations," he said quietly. Her head tilted to one side. Her secondary eyes narrowed while her primary eyes remained fixed on his face. She seemed surprised that he had spoken at all. "I am commander of the Dominion," she said. "You are now a prisoner of war. You will answer my questions. You will tell me everything about your mission, your fleet movements, your defensive capabilities. If you cooperate, your death will be quick. If you do not, it will be slow." Jake said nothing. He simply watched her with those calm brown eyes that seemed to see right through her threats. Leaned closer. "Do you understand what I am telling you, human?" "I understand," Jake replied. "But you should understand something too. I am not afraid of you." For a moment something flickered across her face. Not anger, something else, something she could not name. She straightened and turned away from him. "Take him to the holding cells," she ordered. "Begin standard interrogation protocols at first light." The guards grabbed Jake by the arms and hauled him to his feet. As they dragged him toward the exit, he glanced back over his shoulder. Was still standing in the same spot, her back turned to him. But he noticed that her scales had shifted slightly. The silver blue had faded to a pale around the edges. He did not know what that meant, not yet. They threw him into a small cell with bare metal walls and a single dim light. The door sealed behind him with a heavy clang. He was alone in the cold and the silence. Jake sat down on the floor and closed his eyes. He focused on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady. His body was weak, but his mind was clear. He had survived the ambush. He had survived the vacuum. He would survive this too. Because that was what humans did. They survived. They endured. They kept going when every other species in the galaxy would have given up. It was not something they chose. It was simply what they were. And as Jake sat alone in that alien cell, stripped of everything he owned, he made a silent promise to himself. He would walk out of this ship alive, no matter what it took, no matter how long it required. He would show them what a human could do. The first night was the easiest. They left him alone in the cold cell, letting the silence and isolation do their work. Jake slept on the metal floor, using his arm as a pillow. His body was exhausted, and his sleep was deep despite the discomfort. When morning came, they began. 2 interrogators entered his cell. They were specialists, trained in the art of breaking prisoners. Their scales were a dull color that never seemed to change, professional, emotionless. They asked him questions about his fleet, his mission, his command codes. Jake gave them nothing but name, rank, and identification number. They did not like this answer. The first technique was sleep deprivation. They installed bright lights in his cell that never turned off. Every time he closed his eyes, a loud alarm would sound. Every time he began to drift away, a guard would bang on the door. They kept this up for 36 hours straight. Jake responded by humming old songs from Earth that his mother used to sing, folk songs about rivers and mountains and long roads home. The melodies kept his mind anchored. They gave him something to focus on besides the burning in his eyes and the fog in his thoughts. When the interrogators returned, he was tired but not broken. His answers remained the same. The second technique was temperature. They lowered the heat in his cell until frost began to form on the walls. The thin he wore offered almost no protection. His breath came out in thick white clouds. His fingers turned blue at the tips. But Jake had grown up in Chicago. He knew cold. He began doing exercises in his cell, push-ups, squats, jumping in place, anything to keep his blood moving and his body warm. The guards watched him through the door with confusion. They had never seen a prisoner do this before. Most species simply curled up and waited to freeze. On the second day, they changed tactics. A tray of food appeared in his cell, hot food that smelled wonderful after so many hours without eating. But Jake noticed the slight discoloration in the meat. He noticed the way the vegetables glistened with something that was not water. The food was poisoned, not enough to kill him, just enough to make him sick and weak. He pushed the tray away and drank only water from the small tap in the corner. His stomach growled with hunger, but he ignored it. He had gone without food before. During survival training back on Earth, they had dropped him in the wilderness for 2 weeks with nothing but a knife and his wits. Hunger was an old enemy. He knew how to fight it. Commander watched all of this through the monitoring system in her quarters. She sat at her desk with reports scattered around her, but her eyes kept returning to the screen that showed the human prisoner. He should have broken by now. Every other species they had captured would have broken by now. Though with their thick armor and battle rage, lasted maybe 2 days before the isolation drove them mad. The infiltrators, supposedly the most mentally disciplined species in the galaxy, cracked under temperature manipulation within hours. Even the stubborn traitors eventually gave up their secrets when faced with hunger and exhaustion. But this human simply sat in his cell, breathing slowly, watching the door with calm eyes that never seemed to waver. He hummed his strange songs. He did his exercises. He refused their poisoned food. He adapted to everything they threw at him as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. On the third day, could no longer stay away. She had to see him for herself. The cell door opened and she stepped inside. Jake looked up at her from his spot on the floor. He was thinner now. Dark circles had formed under his eyes. His lips were cracked from dehydration. But when he met her gaze, there was no surrender in his expression. No pleading. No desperation. "Why do you not break?" demanded. Her voice was sharper than she intended. "Your body is soft. You have no natural defenses. No venom glands, no armor plating, no claws or fangs. Your species should be weak. You should be begging me for mercy by now." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke in a voice that was rough from thirst but steady in its conviction. "You want to know why humans are dangerous?" Felt something cold move through her chest, a strange sensation she did not recognize. "Tell me," she said. Jake pulled himself up so that he was sitting with his back against the wall. Every movement cost him energy he did not have, but he made it look easy. "It is not because of what we have," he said. "It is because of what we can endure. You can take away my armor. You can take away my weapons. You can take away my food and my sleep and my warmth. But you cannot take away what I am. You cannot take away the millions of years that made me." Stepped closer without meaning to. Her guards shifted nervously at the door. "Your species evolved on a death world," Jake continued. "I know you have read the reports. Earth is filled with predators, diseases, natural disasters, extreme temperatures. Everything on our planet is trying to kill us. It has been that way since the beginning. And you know what? We did not just survive. We dominated. We climbed to the top of the food chain not because we were the strongest or the fastest. We did it because we never stopped. We did it because we could take more punishment than anything else alive and still keep going." He met her eyes directly, 4 alien eyes staring into 2 human ones. "So you can torture me," he said quietly. "You can starve me. You can freeze me. You can do whatever you want, but I will not break. I will not give you what you want because I am human, and this is what we do. We endure." Stood motionless. Her scales had shifted to that pale color again, the color of deep disturbance, of fear she did not want to acknowledge. "You are insane," she whispered. "Your entire species is insane." Jake smiled. It was a small and tired expression, but it was real. "Maybe," he admitted, "but we are still here. After everything the universe has thrown at us, we are still here. Can your species say the same?" Had no answer for him. She turned and walked out of the cell without another word. The door sealed behind her, and she stood in the corridor for a long moment, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. She had interrogated hundreds of prisoners. She had broken warriors and spies and criminals of every species. Never once had she felt afraid of someone in a cell. Never once had she felt like the one being studied. Until now. She returned to her quarters and pulled up every file on humanity that the database contained. She read through the night, learning about this strange species from a harsh blue world. And the more she read, the more that cold feeling in her chest began to grow. Because she was beginning to understand something terrible. They had not captured a prisoner. They had captured something far more dangerous, something that no amount of torture could contain. They had captured a human. Stopped the official interrogations on the fourth day. She told her superiors that the human was resistant to standard techniques and required a different approach. She told them she would handle him personally using psychological methods. This was partially true. The full truth was that she had become obsessed. She began visiting his cell alone, late at night when the monitoring systems could be disabled without raising suspicion. She told herself it was for intelligence gathering. She told herself she was simply studying the enemy to find his weakness. But deep down she knew these were lies she told to justify her curiosity. On the first night she brought him water and a small portion of untainted food. Jake accepted both without comment. He ate slowly, savoring each bite like it might be his last. When he finished, he looked up at her with those steady brown eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Sat down across from him, her back against the opposite wall. The cell was small enough that only a few feet separated them. "Tell me about your world," she said. "Tell me about Earth." Jake studied her for a long moment. He seemed to be deciding whether this was another trick. Finally, he spoke. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. I want to understand how your species became what you are." So Jake told her. He told her about the ancient plains of Africa where humanity first emerged millions of years ago. He described how early humans were not the strongest creatures. They had no claws for fighting, no thick skin for protection, no natural weapons of any kind. But they had two things that nothing else possessed. They had minds that could plan and adapt, and they had bodies that could run. "We were persistence hunters," Jake explained. "Do you know what that means?" Shook her head. "It means we did not chase our prey to catch it quickly. We chased it until it died. We would pick an animal and follow it across the plains for hours, sometimes for an entire day. The animal would run and we would follow. It would stop to rest and we would keep coming. Eventually its body would give out from exhaustion and heat, and then we would catch it." Scales flickered with disbelief. "That is impossible. No species can run for that long." "Humans can," Jake said. "We sweat. We regulate our body temperature in ways that most creatures cannot, and our minds can push our bodies past the point where other animals would simply stop. We can ignore pain. We can ignore exhaustion. We can keep going through sheer force of will." He told her about the mountains, how humans climbed the highest peaks on Earth not because they needed to, but simply because the mountains were there. He told her about a peak called Everest where the air was so thin that most creatures would die within minutes. Humans climbed it anyway. Hundreds of them. Some died on the way up. Others died on the way down. But they kept trying, generation after generation, until standing on that frozen summit became almost routine. He told her about the oceans, how ancient sailors built wooden ships and crossed vast expanses of water with no guarantee of finding land on the other side. They navigated by the stars. They survived on rainwater and whatever fish they could catch. Many of them perished at sea, swallowed by storms or claimed by thirst. But others made it through. They discovered new continents. They mapped the entire planet using nothing but courage and determination. "Your people have instant communication," Jake said. "Faster than light travel, maps of the entire galaxy. We had none of that. We had only our willingness to risk everything for the chance of something more." Listened in silence. Her scales had shifted to a soft blue color, the color of deep thought, of wonder. Jake told her about wars, not to glorify them, but to explain what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. He told her about soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save their companions, about medics who ran into fire to drag wounded friends to safety, about ordinary people who hid refugees in their homes knowing they would be killed if discovered. "We are not saints," Jake admitted. "We have done terrible things to each other. We have committed horrors that would shock even the most violent species in your records. But we have also shown a capacity for sacrifice that I believe is unique in the universe. When we love something, when we believe in something, there is no limit to what we will give." He told her about the space program, how humanity had looked up at the stars for thousands of years and dreamed of reaching them, how they built rockets that exploded and killed their pilots, how they kept building anyway, how they landed on their moon using computers less powerful than a basic calculator, how they sent probes to the edges of their solar system and beyond, carrying messages for any species that might find them. "We did not know if anyone was out there," Jake said. "We did not know if the universe was empty or full. We reached anyway, because that is what we are. We are the species that reaches." When he finished speaking, the cell was quiet, realized she had been holding her breath. Her hands were trembling slightly against her knees. "You describe a species of madness," she said softly. "A species that does not know when to stop, that does not accept limits, that keeps pushing forward even when all logic says to quit." Jake nodded. "That is exactly what we are." "It is terrifying." "Yes." Stood slowly. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the release. "The other species we have encountered," she said without turning around, "they have strengths. They have their rage. They have their discipline. They have their cunning, but all of them have limits. All of them can be predicted, can be contained." She turned to look at him. "Your species has no limits. You cannot be predicted. You cannot be contained. You simply keep going until you achieve what you want or die trying. And even death does not always stop you because others will pick up where you fell." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Now you understand," he said. Opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Before she sealed it behind her, she spoke one last time. "I am beginning to think," she said quietly, "that capturing you was the biggest mistake my people have ever made." The door closed. Jake sat alone in the dim light, thinking about home, thinking about all the humans who had come before him, all the struggles they had endured so that one day their descendants could reach the stars. He would not let them down. He would show this alien commander, and everyone else in the galaxy, exactly what it meant to be human. And he would do it without a single weapon in his hands. The attack came on the 7th day. Jake was asleep when the first explosion rocked the ship. He woke instantly, his body responding before his mind could catch up. Years of military training had taught him to recognize the sound of hull breaches and weapons fire. Something was very wrong. Alarms screamed through the corridors. Red emergency lights replaced the normal blue illumination. He could hear shouting in the language, orders being given, feet running past his cell. Another explosion, closer this time, made the walls shake. He stood and moved to the door. Through the small window, he could see chaos unfolding. Soldiers ran past with weapons drawn. Some of them were bleeding. Medical personnel rushed in the opposite direction, carrying wounded crew members on stretchers. Then the power flickered and died. For 3 heartbeats, everything was darkness. Jake heard the backup systems struggle to engage. When the lights returned, they were dimmer than before, and his cell door had failed. It stood open by 6 inches, a gap created by the power surge that had scrambled the electronic locks. Jake did not hesitate. He pushed the door open and stepped into the corridor for the first time in 7 days. The air was thick with smoke that burned his lungs. Emergency sirens wailed from every direction. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew an opportunity when he saw one. He could have run. The path to the escape pods was probably clear in all this confusion. He could have found a way off this ship and taken his chances in the void. Any other prisoner would have done exactly that. But Jake was not any other prisoner. He saw a wounded soldier lying against the wall, clutching a wound in his side. Green blood seeped between his fingers. His 4 eyes were wide with pain and fear. Jake recognized him. He was one of the guards who had watched over the cell, one of the ones who had participated in the sleep deprivation. Jake knelt beside him. "Pressure," he said, pressing his hands against the wound. "Keep pressure on it, help will come." The soldier stared at him in confusion. He did not understand why the prisoner was helping him instead of fleeing. Jake did not have time to explain. He heard another explosion and felt the deck tilt beneath his feet. The ship was in serious trouble. He needed to find out what was happening. He moved through the burning corridors with a calm that came from years of training. He checked rooms as he passed, pulling wounded crew members away from fires and collapsed bulkheads. An engineering technician with burns on his arms. A young communications officer trapped under debris. A medical orderly who had been knocked unconscious by a falling beam. Jake helped them all. He did not think about their species. He did not think about the fact that they had held him prisoner. He saw beings in pain and he responded the way humans had always responded, with compassion, with action. The situation became clear as he moved deeper into the ship. A rival faction had attacked. Their warship had dropped out of faster-than-light travel and opened fire without warning. Boarding parties had breached the hull in multiple locations. This was not a rescue. This was a takeover. Jake found a section of corridor where 3 enemy boarders had cornered a group of crew members. The attackers wore different colored scales, marking them as members of a different clan. They held plasma rifles aimed at the terrified crew, shouting demands in a dialect Jake could not fully understand. He did not have a weapon. He did not have armor. He had nothing but his body and his mind. He analyzed the situation in 2 seconds. The corridor was narrow. The artificial gravity was unstable in this section, flickering between normal and reduced. There was debris scattered on the floor. The boarders were focused entirely on their prisoners and had not noticed him approaching from behind. Jake charged. The first boarder never saw him coming. Jake grabbed a piece of metal debris and slammed it into the back of his head. The alien went down hard. The second boarder spun around, but the gravity fluctuation caught him off balance. Jake used his momentum against him, grabbing his arm and twisting it at an angle that forced him to drop his weapon. A knee to the midsection doubled him over. An elbow to the back of the neck finished him. The third boarder managed to raise his rifle. Jake was already moving. He ducked under the barrel and drove his shoulder into the alien's chest. They crashed into the wall together. The rifle discharged wildly, burning a hole in the ceiling. Jake grabbed the boarder's head and slammed it against the bulkhead once, twice, 3 times. The alien slumped to the floor unconscious. The entire fight lasted 11 seconds. Jake stood among the fallen enemies, breathing hard. Blood dripped from cuts on his arms and face. His ribs ached where he had taken a glancing blow, but he was still standing. The crew members stared at him in stunned silence. They had just watched an unarmed human take down 3 armed soldiers using nothing but speed and ferocity. "Get to the escape pods," Jake told them. "Go now." They went. Jake continued through the ship. He sealed breaches with emergency foam. He redirected confused crew members toward safety. He fought 2 more groups of boarders, taking injuries each time but never stopping. The battle raged around him, and he moved through it like a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. Found him near the bridge. She came around a corner with her own weapon drawn, ready to engage the enemy. Instead, she found the human prisoner standing in a corridor filled with unconscious boarders. his thin torn, and soaked with blood that was both red and green. "You are still here," she breathed. "You could have escaped, you could have let us die. Why did you stay?" Jake looked at her with those steady brown eyes. Even now, battered and bleeding, there was no weakness in his gaze. "Because that is not who I am," he said simply. Stared at him. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading. Her crew had regained control of the ship. The enemy boarders were being captured or driven back to their own vessel. They had survived. "Because of him." "You saved my people," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "You saved the ones who tortured you, who held you prisoner. Why?" Jake wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand. "Because they needed help," he said. "That is reason enough." Felt something break open inside her chest. All her life she had been taught that strength meant dominance, that power meant the ability to destroy, that survival meant crushing everyone who stood in your way. This human had shown her something different. He had shown her a strength that did not require weapons, a power that came from choosing to help instead of harm, a survival instinct that extended beyond the self to include even those who had wronged him. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing she had ever witnessed. "Come," she said softly, "let me tend to your wounds." She took his arm and led him toward the medical bay. And as they walked through the damaged corridors of her ship, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. Not for her, not for her crew, not for anyone who learned what had happened here today. The human had changed everything. The battle was over. The enemy faction had retreated, their boarding parties either captured or destroyed. The warship limped through space on damaged engines, heading toward the nearest station for repairs. Nearly half the crew had been killed or wounded in the attack. The survivors moved through the corridors with haunted eyes, trying to make sense of what had happened. And in the medical bay, the human prisoner sat quietly while an alien doctor treated his wounds. Jake had taken more damage than he realized during the fighting. 3 cracked ribs, a deep cut on his left arm that required sealing, multiple bruises and lacerations across his body. The doctor worked in silence, her 4 eyes occasionally flickering to his face with an expression Jake could not read. When she finished, she stepped back and said something in that he did not understand, but her tone was clear. Respect, maybe even awe, appeared in the doorway. "Leave us," she told the doctor. The medical staff filed out. The door sealed behind them. For a long moment, simply stood there, watching Jake with those silver-blue scales that seemed to glow in the soft light. "I have submitted my report to High Command," she said finally. "I have recommended that you be released under diplomatic protocols. Your actions during the attack have been documented. Multiple crew members have given testimony about what you did." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected something like this. Even they had rules about prisoners who saved lives. "They were not happy," continued. "They wanted to know why I was releasing a valuable intelligence asset. I told them the truth. I told them that you had demonstrated something that made holding you impossible." "What did you tell them I demonstrated?" Walked closer. Her movements were different now, less like a predator stalking prey, more like a person approaching something sacred. "I told them that you demonstrated why humanity must never become our enemy." She stopped an arm's length away from him. This close, Jake could see the subtle patterns in her scales, the way they shifted and flowed with her emotions. Right now they were a pale that bordered on white, the color of profound disturbance. "I have studied your species," she said. Her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Before you came here, I thought I understood what humans were. Soft creatures from a harsh world, survivors by accident of evolution, a species that had somehow stumbled into the stars without the natural advantages that other races possessed." She paused. Her secondary eyes closed while her primary eyes remained fixed on his face. "I was wrong. I was so completely wrong." Jake waited. He sensed that she needed to say this, that it was important for her to put words to what she had learned. "You are terrifying," continued, "not because of what you can do with weapons or ships or technology. Any species can build those things. Any species can learn to fight and kill and conquer." She took another step closer. They were almost touching now. "You are terrifying because of what you are without them. I watched you survive interrogation that would have broken any other creature in the galaxy. I watched you endure pain and cold and hunger as if they were minor inconveniences. I watched you charge armed soldiers with nothing but your bare hands and win." Her hands were trembling. Jake could see the slight shaking in her fingers as she clenched them at her sides. "And then I watched you save the lives of the people who had tortured you. I watched you risk everything for beings who had given you nothing but suffering. That should not be possible. No rational creature should be capable of that. No species should possess that combination of endurance and ferocity and compassion." She reached out and placed her hand against his chest. He could feel the coolness of her scales through the thin fabric of his. "You stand before me with nothing," she whispered. "No armor, no weapon, nothing but your soft human body and your steady human heart. And I am the one who feels small. I am the one who is afraid." Jake looked into her 4 eyes and saw something he had not expected: vulnerability, honesty, a warrior stripped of her certainties and forced to confront a truth she had never imagined. "Will your people come for you now?" she asked. "Yes," Jake said quietly. "They have been looking for me since the moment I disappeared. They will never stop looking. That is another thing about humans. We do not abandon our own." Closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was something new in her expression, something that looked almost like respect, maybe even admiration. "Then I hope that our species never become true enemies," she said, "because I do not think the galaxy is ready for what humans would become if they had something worth fighting for, if they had something to protect, if they were pushed to the point where they truly unleashed everything they are capable of." She stepped back and straightened to her full height, a commander again, but changed, forever changed. "A transport will arrive within the hour to take you to neutral space. Your people will collect you from there. You are free, Jake, free to return to your life, to your world, to your kind." Jake stood slowly. His injuries protested, but he ignored them. He extended his hand toward her, a human gesture that she had learned about in her research. Looked at his hand for a long moment. In culture, such contact was intimate, meaningful, reserved for family and the closest of allies. She took it. Her scaled hand wrapped around his soft human fingers. The touch was cool and strange and somehow perfect. "You have changed me," she admitted. "You have changed how I see your species, how I see the galaxy itself. I do not know if I should thank you or curse you for that." Jake smiled. It was the first real smile he had allowed himself in days. "When you think of humans," he said, "do not think of me. Think of all the humans who came before me. The ones who ran across plains and climbed mountains and sailed oceans. The ones who suffered and sacrificed so that their children could have a better life. I am nothing special. I am simply the product of millions of years of ancestors who refused to give up." He released her hand and walked toward the door. Before he reached it, he turned back one last time. "That is the secret you have discovered. Humans are not dangerous because we are strong. We are dangerous because we carry every generation that came before us, every struggle, every triumph, every moment of defiance against a universe that tried to kill us." He paused. "You captured one human. You saw what one of us could do. Now imagine billions of us, united, determined, with something precious to defend." Felt a shiver run through her entire body. Her scales shifted to the palest color they had ever been. "That is why I trembled when I looked at you," she whispered. "Not because of what you are, but because of what your species could become." Jake nodded once. Then he walked out of the medical bay and toward the transport that would carry him home. Behind him, Commander stood alone in the empty room, her hands still shaking. She would spend the rest of her life thinking about this moment, about the human who had walked into her ship with nothing and walked out having changed everything. She would tell others what she had learned. She would warn them about humanity, about the fire that burned inside them, about the endless capacity for both destruction and compassion that made them the most unpredictable species in the known universe. And she would hope, with every fiber of her being, that the Dominion would never be foolish enough to truly make enemies of such creatures. Because she had seen the truth with her own 4 eyes. Humans did not need armor. Humans did not need weapons. Humans only needed to be pushed far enough. And then the entire galaxy would tremble.